could. Yeah, and times are changing everywhere. Do we dream and do we dare? It's up to you. The door is open wide. Feel the rhythm of today. Learn the part and join the play. The world is here. Let's take it for a ride. You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Larger, larger than, bigger, bigger than, living hopes and dreams. Every boy and girl, higher, higher than, brighter, brighter than, all you wanted. You know, you could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted. You know you could.
Good morning and welcome back to the channel Grand Colombia from Armenia, Colombia, and welcome to another Coffee Time Live. Excuse me. Got a high today of 83 degrees. We got a low of 65 degrees. The Colombian peso to the dollar exchange rate is 39.17, and right now it's about 80 degrees. And I want to say, today's all about comments that I've gotten. The whole day, the whole program is about that. Comment I got was, why is it so damn hot when the high temperatures aren't anything all that unusual? And I had to think about that. It's been unusually hot. And then I realized, okay, let's say that before El Nino, we would have a high temperature of 83 degrees. But it didn't seem that bad. You know, you go out in the morning and it's rather cool and you do your thing and have lunch and then you go back to your place and kick around, maybe go out later in the afternoon. It wasn't that bad. Now it just seems to be hot all the time. It's because it's been hot a lot, where we'll have a high of 83 degrees. Typically, we'll have that high for maybe an hour. Right now, we got 80 degrees now. We got 80 to 83 degrees all the way into the afternoon. So what that does is that heats up the roads, it heats up the concretes in my building, it heats up the roof. So it makes my apartment warmer than normal, even though we don't have the high. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll be glad when this thing is over. Howard, thank you. I'll get to the chats here in just a moment. Another comment, well, letter, wanted me to explain why I'm living in Colombia and not in Ecuador and what was wrong with Ecuador as compared to Colombia. I'm not going to go into that because I've talked about it 100 times, why I'm living here happily, and while I lived in Ecuador, I might have enjoyed my friends, but I didn't care for Ecuador all that much. But I'm going to put it in a little 10-second bite of a comparison that will tell you why you'd rather live in Colombia. Here we go. Okay, you got it? So let's take a look at these comments. Let's see. We start off, Yuka, thank you for the contribution. I appreciate it. And Mr. Anonymous Jerry, thank you very much. Yuka, greetings from Helsinki. Howdy, howdy. What time is it there? It's got to be late. Mike Jarvis, how you doing? He had his Facebook page. I don't think it was stolen, but I think it was cloned. Rob, back from Colombia again, back in Fort Lauderdale, Phil 446. I think you meant 442. That was an Oldsmobile. Mr. Ben Lake, how you doing, neighbor? Turtle, howdy, howdy. Charles, buenos dias from New York City. Wish was back in Colombia, mid-March, next trip. If anybody's coming down here to Armenia over the next 2 weeks prior to March, please let me know. There's a package sitting in Florida I'd like to get my hands on. Michael Meyer, good morning. William Hutchinson. This is the good guy, William Hutchinson, not the real estate guy. Good morning. How you doing? And Juka, it's not too late. It's 6 p.m. Well, okay. Yes, it's never too late. Okay. Let's see, what do I have here? Last week, the program last week about financial women, or it was called something like that, and talking about dating and it was all about trying to put things in perspective. I actually got quite a bit of comments on that, and I got several emails, and it was all positive. And that's something I've always been concerned with, that people, put on their id uniform and climb down into the gutter. I guess it was like that in Ecuador. Maybe I shouldn't expect it on this channel because it's never really like that on this channel. But I've always avoided those kinds of topics just because of that. This is not a channel that's here to talk about, women all the time, because I'm not trying to get clickbaits. I'm not trying to get subscribers. And that's what people that do that are usually trying to do. It doesn't mean it's not a valid topic. And I think last week I kind of showed that it certainly could be a valid topic and we can talk about it without being children. Because of that, because of all the positive comments I got, I may do a follow-up to it. There's certainly a lot more that can be talked about, and I'm considering doing a follow-up to it. I don't know yet. I keep monitoring my comments. Whenever I get emails and comments, if there's something that I can address in this coffee time or in any coffee time, I try to do that. I will mention also, that I had food poisoning. I was kind of out of it for a week. And even after I felt better, I was kind of drained. And so, I get the usual emails and I get the comments. I really wasn't responding that week. I was just too out of it. And whenever I get busy or if I'm not feeling good, if I get an email and if it does not actually solicit a response, if they just make a statement, hey, I really enjoyed your coffee time last week or something. And if I'm busy or I'm not feeling well, then I may not respond to it. If it's a comment, I might only give it a thumbs up or something just to show that I read it. If there's a call to action, if you're actually, hey, could you write to me and tell me about XYZ or something like that, I always respond to those. But if you just you're just off the cuff, like I got one not too long ago, it's like, hey, I'm going to be down in Colombia in 2 months. Okay. All right. There's nothing really to say about that. Good for you. If I'm busy or backed up or if I'm not feeling well, there's nothing really to respond to, so I let it slide. And I think sometimes people take offense, like I'm ignoring them, blowing them off. Well, I guess I sort of am, but not really in a negative way. If you have something for me to respond to, I'll respond. But if you're just, telling me the sky is blue, it's yeah, okay. Just so you're aware, it's not. I never try to be intentionally dismissive of people, but sometimes I get a lot of emails and comments, and sometimes maybe I don't feel good, or maybe I'm out traveling, or I'm busy doing something, and kind of takes a back seat. So, I mean, you can hate me for it if you want, but I don't know what to say about that. What else do I have here? Oh, it was brought up that I said something a month or so ago about interviewing people, because some people said, why don't you do more interviews? They're more interesting. Why don't you have more guests on Coffee Time? And I get it. And I got it back then. And what did I do? I said, if there's any of you, I explained why it's difficult to get interviews. And I said, if any of you are interested in telling your story or coming on and just being part of the program, or so, to shoot me off an email. And I put the email up on the screen like that. And guess how many I got? Which didn't surprise me, which is precisely why I don't do that many interviews. I have on my channel, I have a category of interviews that I've done, and they were all pretty good. A lot of good information in them. But I don't pay, and I'm not going to try to twist somebody's arm. Most people are just really shy, or they're awkward, or they don't want to be in the camera because they just don't feel like they're going to feel normal. And I get that. I completely understand it. I hate the camera myself. So, I don't try to force people, but this is why. This is why I don't have that many. When somebody is willing, I find a way to do it. But if, otherwise, what are you going to do? So I've responded to this actually a number of times, but here's a good reason, because a lot of you may remember that I asked that question and I got zero response. So maybe you get a sense of why it's the way it is. Anonymous, thank you for the contribution, whoever you are. Wolfgang Kruger, greetings from Barranquilla, 2 weeks in a row on the live. Awesome. Glad you're here. Sebastian, how you doing? Mr. Colombia. Okay, let's see. I asked if anybody's coming down this month. Please let me know. I got, let's see, 4 little news items. They'll go pretty quick, and then we'll get to the topic today, politics. This is another topic I didn't really want to do, mostly because I'm not really interested in it. But it's unbelievable how many times I get questions on, aren't you worried about the new government and how things are going to change in Colombia, and things along those terms? Aren't you afraid you're going to be like Venezuela or like Ecuador? And I always respond by saying, no, Colombia is not going to let that happen. Well, today we'll talk a little bit about that kind of stuff. First news item is Salento. Please note, if you live here and you're planning on going to Salento, do not go tomorrow, Monday. The road is restricted for repair. And the road is restricted for repair. Now, from 7 to 2 in the afternoon, 7 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, there'll be a section that's one way, and it will open for one way for about 20 minutes, then it'll close down, and the other way will open for about 20 minutes, close down. So you got about a 20-minute back and forth, and that's the way it's going to operate. And then from 2 in the afternoon until 6, it'll be closed in its entirety. So just don't bother. Just don't bother. Let's see. Finally had some decent sushi in Monteria, Cordoba, restaurant Oka, Calle 62, was edible. Little expensive, 2 rolls, 100,000. Oh, yikes! A little expensive. That's not a little expensive. That's very expensive. I'm glad it was edible. Sushis here are edible. They're just not very good. They really shouldn't be called sushi. They're just a Colombian version of what sushi is. It tastes like Colombian food. Okay, next news item. There used to be a library here in Condillo. Now, in the U.S., you have a library system, and we tend to get spoiled. Most of the world doesn't have anything like that. Here in Colombia, you would have libraries in major areas. So in Armenia, we had a library that was down near Catorce, the walking area of 14. It was right just a block off from that. And it was shut down a couple years ago, and I didn't know why. But they're opening up a new library. And this library is actually going to be, they're calling it a library, but it's actually going to be more like a cultural center. There's going to be a theater attached to it. Theater as in live shows, plays, not theater as in movies. And there's some artsy, craftsy things that are going to be surrounding it. And that's why it says a bet on culture. So it's good to know. It's going to be built somewhere in the south this time instead of in central. So pretty cool, I guess. Also, I guess with the internet, it's not as important, although it's much better to have the book in your hand because on the internet, people can change things up. Okay, next story. Oh, yeah. I forgot what I was doing next. With the help of Max is that beautiful dog there. With the help of Max, a man was captured with 398 doses of marijuana in Colombia. I had to laugh at this for a couple reasons. They're calling it doses, and I checked the translation, and they're calling it doses. So, you get a dose of marijuana, I guess. And you notice the man's turned around. That's how they generally do it. They don't blast their face. The police will show their face, and then the criminal will show his back. And there's that little box on the table, so it couldn't have been that much weed, but they caught him, and they're very proud of it. And if you notice, these guys have the same hat as the one I was kind of chuckling about last week, because it looks sort of like Smokey the Bear hat, but it's curled up on the sides. It's because they're not the regular police. These are the environmental protection police, like conservationists kind of thing, forest rangers, along that lines. But I don't know. Weird things make me smile, and that was one of them. And the last news article I have for today. Last week I was talking about, I think it was Inova, where they had the speckled bear. Well, this week there's an article, same place, and it's an ocelot. And they're calling it a tigrita, like a little tiger, but it's actually an ocelot. A lot of these rare animals that are common they're not rare. I mean, out in the wild, they're not rare. It's just that people live in their cities and towns, and the animals kind of keep their distance. And if one shows up for some reason, it's pretty much guaranteed to make a headline. And if you notice, they have the motorcycle race I don't know if you can hear it. It's loud as hell. I got the window open too. If you notice the eyes, they're huge eyes that are kind of weird color. You may not be able to see that. It's because it's a nocturnal animal. Okay, so enough of that. Margay, yeah, yep. They love their animals here. I didn't put this one up, but there was another headline, and it's not for around here, but it's, man, I should get them shut that window. Crazy loud. Could you guys hear that noise? I mean, I have this microphone set up to where you probably shouldn't, but that was so loud. I just don't know. Anyway, so there was this headline that I was tempted to put up just because there's this passionate response to anything about animals here. And this headline was around where the FARC exist. And there were police, and they had their police dog, a Belgian Shepherd, and it was an explosives dog. He's got the dog uniform on with his yellow patch on his chest, explosivos, and so the dog was sniffing around trying to locate a bomb. Well, apparently FARC had well, they caught him, so it's not apparently actuality. They had a sniper that shot the dog to delay finding this bomb that they had set up. This is out in the woods. This is not in a big public area. But anyway, they shot and killed the dog. And there are other people that were injured, both FARC and a couple police, but the outrage was over the dog. And they're pretty strong words in the headline about basically these scumbag murderers that would kill a poor dog like that. I can't hear Moto's. Good. Well, I'm glad you guys can't hear it, because it was pretty bad. It was pretty crazy. I could not hear myself. And that's why I was kind of stammering, because I couldn't hear what I was saying. Okay, enough of the news. Let's get on with the politics. Woohoo! Just a quick rundown. Colombia's had a very stable government. Colombia as a country, its liberation was declared in 1810. And originally, it was actually called the United States Estados Unidos of Colombia, United States of Colombia. In 1821, it ratified its first constitution. So Colombia is a constitutional republic, and it has been since 1821. Now, they may celebrate Liberation Day as 1810, but kind of like 1776, but what was it, 1787, I think, was the Constitution? I don't know. Somebody could call me on that. I haven't had to think about that in a long time. That's what happens when you're shooting from the hip. Somebody look that up. I wonder how close I am to that. So anyway, as a side note, 1822, the United States, one of the first countries of the world, recognized the Republic of Colombia. As I said last week, the ties to Colombia and the United States go way back. Colombia is positioned in the world where people come here and they look and they say, oh, poverty, poverty. Most of those people haven't really traveled much of the world, or they wouldn't be in such surprise to see certain things. And it's because we don't really have zoning here, so you can have this beautiful building and a couple tin shacks next to it. We're in the United States, you don't really see that. You know, the ghettos are kind of kept in one area, and the nice areas are here. It tends to be a bit jumbled up. It's more in your face. They don't They allow people to be street beggars here, where in the United States and Canada, it's like, you can't do that unless you get permits. So Colombia is not as bad as you think. It's actually in the wealthiest country down. Colombia actually rates number 35 as the strength of its economy, and it's considered a middle income country. So the people here, as compared to the rest of the world, are considered to be middle income. That's not to say there isn't poverty here. I've talked about that before. It actually somewhat aligns with what goes on in the United States as far as percentage wise. And you have your poverty, and then you have extreme poverty. I'm not going to go back into all that. But I will say that from when I lived here before, 22 years ago, as to today, I had always told you that, unemployment was over 50% and poverty was very extreme back then. Well, I was looking this up and I saw a stat I'd never run into before, but in the last 20 years, the poverty rate has reduced in Colombia by 50%. So we have half the poverty now as we did 2 decades ago. And that comes from having a relatively stable government. Are there problems here? Yes. Are there things the government could do? Maybe. But they're not big into taxes. They're really big into a lot of personal freedom, and they don't really look to establish a lot of, we're going to tax and create social programs. They're more apt to let me stand out of your way and not deal with a lot of regulations so that you can actually go from peddling gum sticks on the street to getting yourself a box to sell them out of, to then you have a cart. Next thing you know, you got a little storefront and you have your own tienda. And I've seen that personally. My friend with the tacos went within 2 years from selling them on the street to having a cart to showing up at special events and then opening his own little restaurant, because they make it very easy to do that. And so they're kind of, I guess you'd say, more libertarian when it comes to things like that, more of a laissez-faire. Colombia's always had I would say, a more conservative side of the coin of a government throughout its history. It's been very stable. They've never had a socialist or socialist-leaning president in this country. Although Santos might have got close, but he was considered to be kind of middle of the road. Unlike most of South America, which goes through, like Ecuador had Correa, right now in Brazil, they got this lunatic who's trying to shut down all kinds of freedom of the press, and he's going over the deep end. So you've always had this big pendulum swings of very left and then very right and back and forth. And it's never really been like that in Colombia. Colombia's had its own problems with its endless, you might as well say, civil war against criminals, the FARC and the ELN, things like that. Petro, who's the current president, was the very first one that came along that, people argue whether he's socialist, not socialist. Let's just say all his friends were either criminals or socialists. When he needed medical work, instead of having it done here in Colombia, one of the best in the world for medical, he went to Cuba, where he has very close friends, and he had his medical situation done there. He has a very close affinity to Maduro in Venezuela. He has an affinity with, what's his name there in Nicaragua, has been there for a million years. I'm just drawing a blank. And he's got very close personal ties with the FARC and with some of the cartels, including some campaign funding information that came out last year. So, so here Colombia finds itself with a left of center kind of a socialist sort of guy. And you're not alone if you are worried, because a lot of Colombians were very concerned. And a lot of Colombian, Ortega, yes, thank you. And a lot of somebody was paying attention, thank you. A lot of Colombians were very concerned, particularly with the election itself, because if you look at the map of where the votes came from, they came from Bogota, because the guy was the mayor of Bogota and he has his apparatus there. And then all the rest of it came from the coast, the most poor of Colombia. And where it turns out that the money from the cartel, this was admitted to by his closest friend and then his son, who gave a confession when they found 5 suitcases full of cash. Money came from the cartels into the election, and there were people out in those areas essentially handing out money with promises of votes. Nothing ever came of it. I don't know what the deal is on that, because there was public testimony, as a matter of fact, of some of this stuff. But neither here nor there. He's president. He's still president. And a lot of people, when you looked at the map, almost the entirety of Colombia did not want this man, but Bogota and the coast did. He becomes the president. So where did that leave us? Well, he came in under promises of change, cambio, a change. He was going to be the change leader. Those 214 years of consistency as a constitutional republic, it was going to that was kind of going to go out the window, and we're going to have change. And the first thing he tried to do was to nationalize the utilities. I talked about that last year here with my little mocker. I don't have it on here, but I had this little mocking bite every time I had a news article that pertained to him. And when he first became president, it's like almost every week I would have something. I would play that thing and go ahead, make my day. You may remember that little clip that I would play. And then I would talk about him, something that he tried to do and it wouldn't work. It's because these things kept failing. His big thing that he was nominated for, yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. You're not wrong. We'll get to it. His big thing, and he was supposedly nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and I don't even understand, because it was just because he proclaimed that he was going to call for a ceasefire with the FARC, the ELN, and the GoPro, the Gulf cartel. So those 3 groups. The FARC, they're pretty obscure. They nibble at the fringes. They're a shadow of their former selves. If you had an active government that wasn't trying to look good to the world, they could actually go in and clean that up in a matter of a month. You have the ELN, who became much stronger because they're on the border with Venezuela, and there's a lot of interaction with Venezuelan criminals and Colombian criminals, which are kind of one and the same these days. And they own little towns around there that you don't want to go, like Cucuta and north, and even or west, northwest. You kind of want to stay away from those areas. But he wanted to have a ceasefire, and he did. So he had a ceasefire, and they all agreed they're going to have a ceasefire. Well, what did I just say about the FARC and the bomb-sniffing dog and assassinating the little dog? And these things never really stopped. So what really happened was the Colombian authorities were pulled back and ordered not to do anything. But these things at first, little to nothing, but eventually they started showing up again, because you're not dealing with organizations that are anything more than just criminal organizations. And criminals are going to do crime. And when you do crime, you have to step on toes, you have to threaten, you have to extort, you have to do certain things that will eventually come to blows. You know, you can't really threaten extortion on somebody if you're not willing to be violent against them. So the ceasefire was kind of laughable, but especially with the Gulf cartel, which is, they call it a Colombian cartel, but it's actually a franchise of Mexico. It's really a Mexican cartel. And they actually have expanded operations. So the ceasefire was an abysmal failure. And that was supposed to be the crowning achievement. So just recently, because of the humiliation about all this, because people are pointing this out, you remember he didn't win his position with most Colombians, despite how that vote went. You know, they've been kind of pointing it out. And he has the same phenomenon, which I have shown you, or if he's out in public, he gets booed, and stadiums are basically doing F you, Brandon, kind of. They're doing the same thing for Petro. He is not popular here. As a matter of fact, his favorability percentage is 26% right now, which is, it doesn't get much worse than that. So he's kind of hated. And his crowning jewel for the ceasefire, it kind of fell through. So he has retracted the official ceasefire on the Gulf cartel. And so he's kind of, I would like to say, let loose the dogs of war, but nothing that dramatic. But he has taken the handcuffs off some people that he had held back. So, you know, we'll see what goes on there. If you have these criminal organizations and you leave them alone, they're only going to grow. I mean, why would you think otherwise? But like I say, he has personal relationships with most of these. Okay, so his own party is very unhappy with him. And then you take the situation in general of what's going on with the economy. Well, the economy here, as in most of the world, is kind of driven by the economic blunders of the last couple of years of the United States. Everybody kind of goes along for the ride, and it all came out of COVID. So you not only have the economy of the United States affecting the global economy, but then you have the individual countries, depending on how they handle COVID, dealing with that also. And so here we've got, you know, we all know about the inflation, you know, eggs double the cost and all the things that we've talked about. You mentioned taxes have risen. I'm not sure what you mean on that. I'm not going to say that's not true, but I'm not aware of what taxes have gone up. I mean, the EVA is still the same. It's still at 19%, and there's not a lot of income tax, but there may be some other taxes. I think they did put taxes on oil, which is a big part of the economy here. And you also mentioned investments. Yeah, investments plummeted. Actually, investments plummeted after his election because of fear. And then they started to rebound, and then they tanked again. Every time we would try to do something like nationalize utilities, for example, you know, who wants to invest in a country that's headed in that direction? Yes, he cozied up to Venezuela. One of the first things he did was open the border again and remove all barriers and penalties, which ultimately means it's kind of supporting Maduro, because financially he is personally benefiting from that. Supported Hamas, true, but only verbally, which is something. Corrupt and authoritarian, absolutely, definitely corrupt. That's been proven. Another thing, you know, this country is very family oriented, and I think he thought it was going to changed perception of him. His son came out, caught with the suitcases of the money. His son came out and publicly confessed that that money came from the cartels and was used for buying votes, and he was personally there doing it on behalf of his father. Well, his father decided to disown his son. I don't know. Anything he did on his own. I didn't ask him to. As a matter of fact, we're estranged. We're not really even on speaking terms. Well, that kind of backfired on him, because a country that is so into family, no matter what your son did, how could you treat him that way? How could you throw him under the bus? One, or even if it's not that, how could you turn your back on your son? So, I mean, he put himself in a box that it became a no-win thing. It's like, what a scumbag. And even here, the party of the left, they're not left like in the US where, you know, they're completely over the bend. There's actually a spectrum, and there's a lot of middle to middle left that carry those same family values. And that single act probably cost him more than everything else that he did. That was a huge thing. And talking to people I know here, and you know, if you bring up one thing, regardless of where their politics are, that seems to be a thing that really got people wound up. Authoritarian, he's certainly authoritarian, although he hasn't been allowed to. He has tried in a number of ways, but he hasn't been allowed to. And what he would need to do to turn this economy around quickly, he won't do, because he's in a political box where if he does the economically conservative things that you need to do, then he's betraying the only support he has left. And so he's kind of in a, you know, what does he do there too? Because even if he does what he should do to affect the economy and things turn around rather quickly, people won't forgive him for everything else. So tax on gasoline, toll roads, true. Food items, I'm not sure on that. I probably should have done my homework on it. I can't really speak to something I don't specifically know. Tax on gasoline, that's true. Good point. Definitely the tolls. I think there was actually incremental tax on the gas and the tolls. They didn't do it all at once, but over the course of something like 6 months, it jumped up every month. And the tolls were, I was out driving at the time, and the tolls were kind of doing the same thing. Every time I go through a toll booth, it was higher than the last time. So I think that's true. Latin America may be headed for times. Oh yeah, Javier, the chainsaw man in Argentina. There's certainly a lot of hope there, and you're right. And Salvador showing the way. Change of these countries are amazing. We've yet to see the change in Argentina, although everything that he's talking about doing will be effective. He certainly identified the issues there, but he's had a while in El Salvador, and I know people. I know a family from there, and it's night and day. This family, the reason I know this family is because several of their children, when they became of age, escaped and got to the United States under legitimate asylum because they were being forced into a gang. And the mother and father got them out, snuck them out, because if they didn't join the gang, they're going to get killed. So it got them out. And they've been living under hell most of their lives. And now, as of about a year ago, things have changed so much that it's like there's a wave of freedom. You know, they can breathe the air again. They're not living in fear the way they did, kind of the way it was from the 90s to 2001, 2002, when Uribe went into Medellin with troops and rappelled out of helicopters and went from block to block to block to to beat the criminals and cartels out of Medellin, which is why you have the beautiful city that it is today. You know, they want to hate on Uribe these days, but there was a time when he was a national hero because he had the courage to do what needed to be done. So, and you can get particularly young people here. If I were to say that to a couple friends that I have, they're in their low or mid to high 20s, we would get into a heated debate. Although people will actually have conversations here, they don't start yelling and screaming and talking over you. But we would get into a debate because they would be pretty passionate about it, and they would state, you know, all these things that aren't necessarily true about Uribe. Was this, he condoned all this mass murder. And this was stuff that was all created by a particular news agency. There's a lot of history to it. But then it was taught in the universities, so you have a whole generation believing some things that weren't true. If you have a generation, let's say, of grandparents, and you bring up the term Los Pepes, those are heroes to them. But if you bring up the term Los Pepes to somebody that's 28 years old, if they know about it, they think it was like the worst criminal organization that ever existed, or they don't never heard of them. It's like one or the other. So he doesn't have that much time left. He's lost basically any credibility that he came, if he had any when he came in, it's pretty much gone. He has not been allowed to make any of those changes that he was trying to make. And I said this in the beginning, you know, back when he was elected, and I was asked on here, you know, it's like, aren't you really worried? Are you going to move? And no, I don't think so, because I don't think Colombia will let that happen. And I remember I got this, I think I got more than one, but I got this one particular email telling me how naive I was. And it's like, well, I get it. And I might, you know, you're talking about predicting the future. And I can't claim to predict the future. I was just giving my opinion. And that was my opinion. I just could not picture Colombians allowing that to happen. And they didn't. they didn't allow it to happen. Now, when it comes to the taxes and stuff like that, the country has been desperate for income because of the state of the economy. And I've actually been surprised that there hasn't been more overt action, even some emergency actions to take place. But really, if they really wanted to put this economy back on track, they would let the oil companies go back to producing without infringement and selling. And that money would be coming back into Colombia, and it would go a long way. You know, the idea of we're going to jump on the global bandwagon and ban fossil fuels. I mean, you know, maybe that won him support and got him some election money from various places in the world, but it was really putting a big hurt on Colombia at the worst time. Let's see, the situation with the Supreme Court was telling. The new Solicitor General issue was key. Previous one was digging up many corruption issues, but his time was up. Yeah, that's always a problem when you have elected officials, which you need to have, but when you start uncovering certain corruption plans that have been taking place, and then your time is up and you're out the door before you can, you know, finally act on it. New person comes in, you know, he's got two ways to go. He can either continue that or become part of it and profit from it. So, you know, it's, yeah, I appreciate that you keep up on this, and I'm aware of that and some other things. I don't pour myself into politics nationally that much. I just kind of keep my ear to the ground. I pay a lot more attention to what goes on locally here. And but we've had those issues, and like the mayor that was suspended because of accusations for corruption, and he was out for 2 years. But then he was reinstated, and the person who was the temporary mayor was the same person who accused him of corruption, who it turned out she was actually the one that was corrupt. So he got his position back, she lost hers, and she got a new number name. Cliff, I'm sure that Cuba healthcare is poor. Why not support your own country? Yeah, it was just before the election, and there were a lot of questions about that. One, possibly it was because he has a health issue that he didn't want the public to know about, which is true, actually. And that was the reason he went to Colombia. That's part, I don't know, nobody knows, but that may have motivated. Well, maybe if I go to Cuba, did I say Colombia? Maybe if I go to Cuba, that information won't get out. So I don't know, but none of that matters. You don't throw your family under the bus. That's that's the moral of the story. That's the bottom line. That needs to be your takeaway from today. All right, I think that's all I have to say on politics. I really, the key question was, aren't you worried? Why aren't you worried? And what's going to happen? Well, I wasn't really worried. I was a little concerned, but I wasn't really worried. I felt that Colombia wouldn't let it happen. And that's pretty much the way that went. Can't go too much to the left in Latin American politics. Military is watching. Remember Chile and Argentina? Yeah, but it's there's a lot of pride here. And if somebody is elected as a president, you're not going to see a military coup. It would have to be something so extreme and so drastic. Like somehow he would have to take the palace guard and use his own people to the palace guard, and which doesn't exist, but use them to take over the Supreme Court, take over the judicial system, something along those lines. In which case you could see, and justifiably, you could see the military step in. But this isn't that kind of country. And that's, remember, this is one of the most stable republics, constitutional republics in the world. There's not very many that have been longer. And it's always been, there hasn't been a break in it. Like Ecuador, people say, well, it's been like that. It's only been like that for a few decades. There was a movie back in the 80s talking about how ridiculous and corrupt it was. It was somebody that was locked away for having a marijuana cigarette or something. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it portrayed Ecuador as this horrific, ridiculously corrupted government because that's the way it was. It's Ecuador's entire history has been like that. Chile used to be like that. They went back and forth, and it finally is stabilized. Brazil, it was stable, but now it's going through some turmoil. But here in Colombia, we've never had that. All the issues in Colombia have been the people in the government against criminals. They call it a civil war, but not really a civil war. The FARC was not a socialist organization. It was a criminal organization. The ELN, they're criminals. They make their money off, they're their own cartel. They make their money off extortion, kidnappings, blackmail, drugs. That's a criminal. And so that's what Colombia's problems have been. Now, there was a time when you had the left and the right all but killing themselves. And there was an extreme period of time La Valencia, I believe it was called. After it was right after World War II, and it went on for about 8 years. Again, I'm taking this off. I know it generally what I'm saying is true. I may have some of the information not quite right because I'm just kind of winging it. And so there was that period of time, but the Constitutional Republic stood during that time. I mean, it's kind of like saying, all right, we had the Civil War, but the Constitutional Republic was always there. I don't know what is going on in the rest of the USA, but around me, Northeast Georgia, the new homes are really slow. 3 or more subdivisions started, but no houses. Seems like developer is slow rolling. Well, of course, the interest rates are sky high, and that has everything to do with home building. In the last local governor and state elections, Petro supporters lost badly. Very true. That will keep Colombia on the right track, keep Petro at bay. Yeah, absolutely. They were already the Congress, basically the equivalent of the Congress. He couldn't get enough votes to get through what he was trying to do. And there were a few things that he tried to do by executive order that the courts denied. And now it's to the point where, like I say, he's lost all credibility. Most of his support that he did have, it's just now a coast to the end. Manufacturers slowing down and less production, fewer sales, maybe along 2024, even 2025. Yeah, it's really sick, and similar in the United States where you got Trump that was out there saying we were a net exporter. I don't know if that was technically true, but they were from what I understand, they were about a year away from that being the case. They had definitely turned the corner, and particularly with natural gas, but also with oil, they had positioned themselves to really be the big supplier on the world market. And there was some already happening. There were ships going to Europe with natural gas and like that. But then all of a sudden, all that was shut down. The different various gas lines were shut down. Some of the land that had been explored and they were getting ready to produce oil on, that got shut down. Leases got pulled. So it kind of shut down the entire industry. And whether people want to recognize it or not, the number one leading cause of a good or a bad economy is actually oil and natural gas production and what happens with that. Because it's not just what goes in your car, it's what makes your clothes. It's used in just about everything that you find in a grocery store. Hopefully not in the food, but it's used throughout. And if you're making that more expensive, everything becomes more expensive. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way until people start using the new versions of nuclear. But that's a whole nother story. And that's what happened here in Colombia. They basically put up obstacles and closed down their biggest source of income. And you do that on the back of COVID and all the struggles and what's going on with the global economy, then you're giving yourself a double whammy. You're just making it that much worse. It was the exact opposite of what Colombia needed. I often wondered, maybe a year or so ago, if he had not done that, what would have happened with inflation? What would have happened with the economy? I think we still would have had inflation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had been more like 3% instead of 15%. Right now, we're running somewhere around 12% inflation, at least judged on January. So we'll see how that goes. All right. We've run almost the hour. Are there any questions, comments? Feel free to send me emails if you want to have a interview. Door's always open. Shoot me off an email. Again, here's my email up on the screen. And if you emailed me and I didn't reply, take a look and see if you actually asked me a question. You probably didn't, and I just moved on, busy with other things. I try to answer them all, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. When do you anticipate that you will post Columbia Coffee Adventure videos? Man, what a great question. Last week really threw me off because it isn't just me. It's involved with another person. And I'm struggling with that. I've gone through 2 other people because I wasn't able to get started and things happen. I still need somebody to do it with, and I'm trying to sort that out. I could do one of the segments and get some of those captured, and I'm thinking about that. I hope by March now, instead of the beginning of February. I was talking about the first or second week of February. Now I'm looking at the first or second week of March. Once I get rolling, it will continue. It's just, trying to get rolling. Now that you're feeling better, what's next with the new channel? Any trips, interviews planned? Interviews, no, but yeah, that's my question. I'm glad you guys are thinking about it. I'm very discouraged that everything got held up, but I feel like I'm retracing steps, and it's kind of frustrating right now. But the primary thing I want to get started, even if I don't hit the coffee farms right away, is I want to do the information segment, about 10 minutes, which I can do that on my own. And I actually was planning this week, no matter what happened, to see if I could get 3 or 4 of those done and available. And then the next thing I can do is cafe. Go to the cafe, evaluate the particular coffee. The idea is that some of these cafes are single source. So this cafe has coffee only from a particular farm, and then go do a segment at that farm. So you can see the farm, see the cafe, and then some specific information about, making coffee or where coffee comes from or things like that. I did talk to somebody yesterday who's not in Condillo, but will be coming to Condillo. But she's working. She's got a farm, and she's I don't know how to describe it. It's not like a student in the university, but she's attached to the university, but she's not a professor. It's a research thing. And one of the things that they're doing is they're researching coffee beans and certain characteristics that they can create, new sprouts of a coffee. Well, she gave me an example that there's a coffee that they have created a hybrid that when you taste it, it's almost like tasting a red fruit berry drink. It still has coffee flavor, but instead of one of those vague things, well, it's got this caramel chocolate. Instead of that, it's a distinct, that tastes like red berry chocolate. So I'm not sure when she's coming. It probably won't be for a few weeks, but I'll be very interested in quizzing her on some specifics about that. Turtle, were you able to get your espresso machine? No, I can't get that part. Is not that uncommon, but I can't get my hands on it because it's got to come out of Europe, and the shipping is it's just not worth it. I can buy a used machine for that price, so I put that all back in a box, and it's just sitting there in parts. I don't know what I'll do with it. Grinder, I haven't got to that yet, so we'll see on that. Okay, anything else? Are we done for the day? All right. Well, thank you. Oh, one of the anonymous. Thank you for all your info. Charles, thank you. I didn't see that earlier. I mean, I saw it came up on the screen, but I didn't see that. And Howard and Jerry and Juka, thank you all. Thank everybody. Thanks for asking about the coffee channel. I really want to get that. It's not going to die. I can promise you that, unless I do first, but I don't expect to. Oh, I didn't show you outside. Let's take a quick look before I sign off. There we go. Probably looking pretty familiar. All right, that's it. We'll see you next week.